2016. This is interviews, music reviews, opinions, and more. This is The Hodder Show.
What is up, everybody? We are rolling audio here today on episode 249 of The Hodder Show. I hope you guys are doing absolutely fantastic. Thanks so very much for tuning in and clicking that play button on today's episode of the podcast. I've got a kick-ass interview for you here today, as I try to have a kick-ass episode every single week here for you on the show. Today, we are being joined by Eitan Melody of Her Majesty The King for what was a fantastic chat. We talked for almost about 2 hours talking about his influences and kind of some of the first music that he ever heard. And we have a really fun kind of discussion about that and influences in general, as well as a little bit about him moving to Canada from Israel, getting into heavier music. And then we also discuss the start of his personal journey into music, learning to play guitar a little bit and kind of how he got into that, and as well as vocals, some of his early band, a lot about writing, a lot, of course, about his current project, his kind of his main project, Her Majesty The King, working with different people. You know, there's a lot of jokes about, you know, Her Majesty The King. You know, they've had a lot of different people in the lineup and kind of how that whole thing happens, and just working with other different musicians. And it's just a really, really fun, interesting chat. I think you guys are really, really going to like it. On top of being a great musician, he also wears a couple different hats kind of within that same world, as far as working as a kind of booking agent, management type with an agency, as well as doing some album artwork design and things like that. So you guys are really, really going to dig this. We have a lot of fun. Before we get into it, though, I, of course, want to take a quick second to give a humongous shout out to one of the biggest supporters of The Hodder Show, my family over at Mean Beard Company. That's right, folks. If you are a bearded individual, or you know someone who is a bearded individual, and you or they need to start taking care of their beard better, check out meanbeardco.com right now. The highest quality beard care products on the market. Me personally, I am a brand ambassador for them, so obviously I had nothing but great things to say about them. But even if I wasn't a brand ambassador, I would still have nothing but fantastic things to say about them, because that's how much I love their product. I use it personally every single day. I used it before I sat down to record this episode. So my beard is feeling fantastic and smelling great. It's definitely important to make sure you use high quality products on your beard, because not only is the hair itself important to keep healthy, but also the skin underneath is so important to keep healthy. And you will find, after using the high quality carrier oils that are in the Mean Beard oil, that your skin underneath your beard and your beard itself is going to feel fantastic and smell great. On top of that, they also have fantastic balms that will help keep your beard looking fresh and staying all nice and held down, if that's the kind of look you're going for. And also, they have a fantastic, unique product called Mean Whip that's kind of the best of both worlds. Me personally, I love my oil and the Mean Whip, as well as my Mean Beard comb. So if you would like any more information, please, again, check out the website, meanbeardco.com, or just hit your boy up. I love talking beards almost as much as I love talking podcasts and music. And if you do go on meanbeardco.com, be sure to use my personal code at checkout. That code is all capitals MB15TJH. Again, use my code, all capitals MB15TJH, to save yourself 15% at checkout. And always remember, folks, with Mean Beard, it's not just the beard, it's the attitude. And now, let's get into my chat with Eitan Melody of Her Majesty The King. All right, gang, I'm very, very excited about this, because this one has been another one of those podcasts that has been a long time in the making. I've been talking with this gentleman to come on the show since like early last year for sure, maybe even longer. I can't even tell you at this point. Time. Very long time, but I'm thrilled to finally welcome onto the show Eitan Melody of Her Majesty The King. Eitan, what's up, man? How you doing?
Hey, man. Thank you for having me.
Very exciting to finally make this happen. And I got to say real quick, just keeping it real, a big thank you for kind of being a trooper with me and doing this podcast so late at night or early in the morning, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, no worries, man.
Yeah, doing the podcast this late at night here, it's always interesting because I always, sometimes I'll work super late, and sometimes to make things happen, we got to do it a little late ski. But we're going to cover a lot of ground here with you today, and I'm excited to kind of finally get to talk to you and get to know a little bit more about the man behind the stunning vocals in Her Majesty the King, as well as a ton of other stuff. You're a great musician on top of being a great vocalist, and
thank you, man.
You're a booking agent and a whole bunch of stuff. So we have a lot of ground to cover for sure. But just kind of starting off, how did this whole thing start with you as far as getting into the? Actually, you know what? Before we even get into that, I'm gonna sidetrack here and segue here real quick. How have you been doing with everything going on in the world right now, as far as being a musician and someone who is obviously very active in the scene? How has this whole, and we're not going to sit and talk about this for an hour or anything, but how has kind of this whole COVID-19 coronavirus thing kind of been affecting you at this point?
Honestly, like it hasn't affected me as like at least not in a negative way. Per se, because I find that a lot of people that had tours lined up and stuff like that, it's affected them drastically. And obviously people outside of the music industry. But for me, I've been more busy and more productive than I've been in a long time during this whole pandemic and during quarantine. So. Yeah, I guess how did it affect me? I guess it kind of made me buckle down and, get working on my stuff even more, spending more time on it than I was even before.
Well, that's awesome. That's kind of the one, I guess, silver lining of this whole situation, that we're seeing so many different musicians and so many different creators you have no choice but to be creative, because you're sitting around at home, even more so than usual for some people. Yeah. Some people aren't able to work, so it's like, well, what else are you going to do? You're going to be creative. Creative people have to create in order to stay sane. So it's good to hear that you're, maybe getting to work on some new stuff.
Oh yeah, man. I've been working on tons of new stuff. I'm excited to share a lot of it, but I gotta keep most of it hush hush because
for sure.
You know how things are nowadays. Like when you release a new project or something like that, you want it to be the full package and you want it to be ready to be marketed. So definitely trying to construct everything very carefully.
For sure, yeah. You don't want to, I guess, in a way, count your chickens before they hatch, or whatever that damn saying is, or
100%,
like
yeah,
that.
Exactly.
While still keeping interest that, hey, but also at the same time, you don't want to be that band that's like, hey guys, big things coming, stay tuned, because
right, yeah,
no one likes that. Let's be serious. I'm all for hype, but definitely don't want to be that, especially at a time like this where I'm seeing so many bands kind of venturing out of their wheelhouses and trying stuff that's, for the most part, it's been really fun and it's been really positive to see, so many musicians connecting and interviewing each other and stuff like that. But at the same time, I'm seeing some bands that are kind of maybe trying to reinvent their wheel a little bit. And I'm like, oh, is this really the time to be doing that? Let's just focus on what's important, focus on writing new material and stuff like that. But anyway, on top of the fact that obviously, the world is a little crazy at the moment, it is good to hear that you're kind of, keeping busy and you haven't been affected too much and you're keeping busy. Obviously, on top of the fact that you're a fantastic musician, I mentioned, you do some booking as well as you do some graphic design as well.
I do, yeah.
It's good to hear that you're kind of got a lot on the go, a lot of hats. But I'm curious, how did kind of this whole journey start for you? When was the first time and some of the first music that you heard, and when was the first time that you really started to kind of get the itch, so to speak?
Oh man, I feel like that's like such a like layered question because like you could think about the beginning of, you know, your musical journey, but then there's also like the moment before that and then the moment before that, like if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Sure.
So
Well,
like
let's start with I always like to ask 'cause it's such an interesting question. What was the first music that you really remember hearing that had an effect on you?
I think it was like some like Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears. Like
Nice.
I'm not gonna front, like it was some pop stuff. It was not like anything metal or heavy. You know, like Her Majesty the King. It was just radio pop. And I remember seeing like I remember moving to like a different apartment for the first time around the time I was maybe like 4 or 5 years old, and there was like some stickers on the bedroom that was supposed to be my bedroom that were left by, I guess, the previous family, and like most of the stickers were like NSYNC and Britney Spears and Backstreet Boys and basically all the big pop like
Nice.
bands of the 90s.
The heavy hitters of the 90s, let's be serious.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny. Did you so like when you were younger, was there like I always hear a lot of people say like, oh, like I would hear, you know, as far as like their introduction to like introduction to like rock music and maybe like radio rock stuff, it was like, oh, I heard it when I was in the car, or, you know, did you kind of have an introduction into kind of the more, obviously, you know, the pop stuff, which is great because I think that's interesting because you have, listening to, you know, your work with Her Majesty the King especially, there is a certain level of, how can I word this probably here? There's a certain amount of like thought put into what you're doing as far as, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit more later, but as far as your vocal lines and the way that you sing, like it's not like you're just a straight up, I'm going to just throw some words at you and yell and blah, 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 blah. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Let me clarify
And
that.
I've done that before too. Like,
Sure.
I'm sure I have. Yeah.
But it's like there's a little bit more almost, I guess, thought as far as like, hey, it's structuring a melody and it's, you know, making sure that there's a hook in there, making sure there's something that someone can sing along to, not necessarily with every single song. Like sometimes you need a heavy song that's just kind of, you know, a bit of a gut punch, but it's interesting to hear that was kind of a little bit how it started. But what was kind of your introduction to that kind of the more rock and metal side of music?
It was definitely like more like, okay, I would say the Beatles, Queen, like that was like, I guess, like the beginning of like anything remotely close to what I'm doing right now in Her Majesty the King. Like even though it's obviously not that close, but just because my mom, like, I guess she had a very specific taste in rock music, and that was some of the rock music that she listened to. My dad was never really into rock music. But like my uncle, like my mom's brother, he used to play bass in a band when he was growing up and listened to Deep Purple and stuff like that. So like he kind of gave that to her, and then like I got that from her, like listening in the car, or like sometimes she would be cleaning the house and like just playing it in the stereo system. And I remember like I remember hearing Queen songs, I remember hearing Beatles songs, and I remember hearing like a Linkin Park song, I think around the time I was like 8 years old, and it was playing on like either MTV2 or like what was the other music network? There was another one. Like,
You're gonna, oh man,
I can't remember it, but
it literally just played music videos all the time, right?
It did. Yeah.
Because like I know we're similar in age. I know we're like kind of in that like.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm in '93. What year are
I'm
you?
91. So yeah, we're
Okay, sweet.
in that very similar. Because I mean, I can remember watching like a lot of that similar, like Linkin Park. I was a little older, so obviously I was 10. So obviously, I remember like the beginnings of Linkin Park, and like, I remember watching like Creed videos on that channel, and like, Nickelback and all that kind of early 2000s rock stuff that I really got into. I can remember the channel, and I don't remember.
It was like VH something.
Yeah,
I want to say VHS, but it's not VHS.
I'm looking it up because this is pissing me off. I need to look this up.
It was back when MTV and MTV2 like still used to play a lot of music videos, like pretty like more than reality TV or anything like that.
Canadian music video channels.
Was it VH1?
I think you're right. I think it was VH1. I'm wanting to say. Yeah, I'm not finding. I think let's just say you're right, just for the sake of argument, because I'm gonna Google
it now too.
Because it's funny how you remember certain things. Like, do you remember the first time that you mentioned? Just Linkin Park's one of those bands, especially for our generation, like that was such a gateway band for so many kids that you maybe listen to the records that your parents listen to, like, I mean, even me personally, like, we kind of have somewhat similar, like, my mom was a huge Led Zeppelin fan, Queen, Black Sabbath, like, rock stuff, and, some heavier rock stuff, but, yeah, the classic rock stuff. Mm-hmm. So when I heard something like
Queen had some heavier riffs back.
Oh, hell yeah. And, I mean, Black Sabbath is, that's freaking Black Sabbath. What's not
exactly,
what's not
like, that's just heavy, period.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So, like, for people like us, who we kind of already had the foundation laid a little bit for understanding, heavy guitar music and things like that, but then also something that was a little more for us, and that was like what Linkin Park brought to the table. From there, was that kind of how, were they that band for you? Where like a lot of people say, oh, like I heard Linkin Park, and then I would hear Chester scream, and like it like made it so that like I kind of started to understand the screaming thing. So then that got them into heavier stuff. Was it similar story for you, or?
In a way, but like maybe not like something I necessarily like consciously look back at as like, oh, like my musical journey started there. But then like when I do think about it, it's like, like I brought it up earlier, I remember that was one of the like first like rock-ish videos that I saw on TV, and I remember like I think again like around that same age, I remember seeing at school, and I grew up in Israel, so I remember seeing at school like graffiti in Hebrew that was like it spelled out Linkin Park. And like not knowing exactly what that is, but feeling like that name is familiar. And then later on, like the more I guess the more or I guess the better way to put it, like since that moment, I started hearing them more and more until around the time I moved to Canada. I started listening to Linkin Park regularly, like on my iPod, like Hybrid Theory and Meteora. And I think that was like around the time I moved to Canada was around the time they came out with that album, the one where the Transformers thing was happening around that time. It was still a good album. Like the Transformers thing didn't take anything away from it. But and then the other thing that like I'm now realizing too, and I guess because of how you worded the question, is that I think that was that. Well, I'm 100% sure now that was the first screaming I heard, because I couldn't pinpoint any screaming that I've heard before that at a younger age or whatever. I just never really thought of Chester's vocals necessarily as like, just like a screaming thing. But then like obviously he screams like in multiple songs, like, and he screams in a more harsh way than many of the other like like screamers and metalcore bands these days. So it's like, I don't know, it's something you don't necessarily think about it, but then like when I sit down and think about now, it's just like definitely a gateway band in terms of like entering this whole like part of like music or side of music.
For sure. It's almost like, I mean, it's interesting that kind of just on this line of thought, like, I mean, for people like us in our generation, I mean, and I'm not trying to make this like me trying to convince you that like Chester was a huge influence on you or anything, but it's funny because for me, like, I'm not a massive Linkin Park fan or anything, but just when I listen to your vocals, it's interesting because one reason why Chester was so influential, the way that he screamed, was because when he would go from his singing to his screaming, it was a very powerful, like, thing. Yes, yeah. And I kind of get that vibe with you. Obviously, you don't sound like Chester. You sound unique, but it's like,
I wish they sounded like Chester.
I think, well, I mean, I think you've got a fantastic scream on you. I think you're in that same.
I really appreciate it.
Of course, I think you're in that same avenue as far as like you almost. There was this story I heard once. I don't remember if it was an interview with Chester or what it was, but they were talking about how sometimes in the beginning of their career after a concert, Chester would literally have to go in the back and like he would like be throwing up the rest of the night because that's how like harsh he would push. Yeah. Which is obviously very unhealthy to do. I'm not saying anyone should do that, right. But when you go from like when you enter like not like your like scream, but almost like your yell scream voice where like it's kind of a little more of like a mid-range scream, you kind of have that like where you're kind of pushing it in a similar way, which is something that I'm also now kind of realizing that I picked up on, and I'm like, man, it's kind of sort of like in that similar avenue, I guess. So that's kind of interesting to hear that they were kind of that band, I guess, in a way, even if you didn't necessarily realize it.
Yeah, because like, and again, like that's not to say like they're not an influence. It's just like I know, like, and I've always looked at them as an influence, like, hence why we're speaking about them right now. I guess why I brought them up and whatnot. But like, I guess I never thought about just how much they were an influence, and that's why it's always interesting to have these kinds of conversations, is because like you kind of learn more about yourself by hearing people talk about, you know, whatever they talk about. And I also like when I look back at it, I think maybe like the first 3 screams I remember listening to when I was like consciously listening to music with screaming on it was Shane from Silverstein, and I forget the name of the vocalist from Rise Against, and then Chester from Linkin Park. Like those were like the first 3 screams that, like, you know, if I really think about, like, that's what I was listening to in, like, you know, towards like the end of grade 8 and beginning of high school.
Big shout outs real quick to Punks on a Podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with them at all, Eitan, but Faith, she just had Shane on her podcast, actually. And they had a fantastic interview. So if you're a fan of Shane from Silverstein, you should definitely go check that out.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out.
Because that
Send me a link after. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, definitely. We're kind of like she's like the other musician interview podcast around here that I'm like buddies with that I'm aware of. So it's nice. I wanted to just, you mentioned that, and I was like, hey, quick plug. Well, that's interesting, man, because those are 3 very dynamic and unique voices. I'm not as up to snuff on Rise Against and Silverstein, but I mean, talking about Rise Against, Tim, I don't know his last name. I know his first name is Tim, who is the vocalist of Rise Against. Another guy who has a very distinct scream and a very distinct voice as far as the way that he presents things and the way that he, you know, will even enter a scream, and the way that he'll transition from his screaming to his singing. And obviously as time went on, they kind of became a band that went in more of the rock, you know, the rock way, where, you know, they would not necessarily scream as much.
Yeah, or for as long or whatever.
But it's still definitely very interesting to hear. Was there anyone else kind of so like it kind of sounds to me like you went from a little bit of a pop influence in the beginning. That was kind of like, oh, this is music, cool. A little bit of the rock stuff was kind of some education with some family, going into starting to get into the more heavier stuff. From there, like you mentioned, like, you were like in grade 8. So as you're kind of starting to become an adolescence, I guess, in a way, was that when you kind of really started to get into the heavier stuff? And also, I want to ask, just because you brought it up and I'm curious, how old were you when you moved to Canada from Israel?
So I moved to Canada when I was 13, turning 13, turning 14. What? My bad. What was the other question? I started thinking about moving to
that's
Canada.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask,
like,
just because I was going to lead into a very ignorant question, just because I know very, very, very little about Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll circle back to the other question, because I wanted to kind of get into how you were introduced to kind of the more heavier stuff. But what is the music listening scene like in Israel? Like, is it like you were mentioning that there was like Linkin Park graffiti in Hebrew and stuff like that? What is it kind of like exactly the same? Is there certain types of music that is bigger over there, or like kind of what's that like? I'm just curious and ignorant to that myself.
Yeah, well, like I definitely wouldn't want to like misrepresent it. So like, yeah, it's definitely important to preface that like the music that I know, or like that I would have experience knowing of, like, like being prominent in the culture there, is from when I was living there, which was like like over a decade ago and whatnot. But I do remember like rap was always big, which like is how Linkin Park is also, like, I feel like a gateway band to other people there, right? Because Linkin Park always had rap. And so all of a sudden, if you're into that, you're hearing something different, and it doesn't sound like all the other rap and hip hop you're listening to. And then another really big, and like pop music, obviously, like any pop music is big pretty much anywhere.
Oh, for sure.
Where there's radio, especially like any international hits. I guess there was a lot of songs that like when I talk to, or not a lot, but I guess there's certain songs that when I talk to my girlfriend about, and I'm like, hey, like, do you remember that song that was like huge in the 90s? It played everywhere, and it's like definitely not like an Israel thing, right? And yeah, and she doesn't end up knowing about it, and then I'll look it up, and it's like, oh, because it was a European hit that didn't do so well in North America. Yeah, so like I guess there's in like in some areas of music there's more of an influence of like Europe as opposed to North America, and like, I guess maybe because that market is a bit closer, like geographically speaking. And then also like what they call like Middle Eastern music is really big there, which is like it's kind of like music that uses quarter tones instead of semitones, like we do in most like traditional Western music. Yeah, and like I was never really a fan of it. Like I was like from a young age, it was like one of those, like, it's like, when people are like, I like anything but country.
Yeah.
I like anything but Middle Eastern music.
Yeah, I hear you. I know what you're saying.
And like, and I can really say that I don't like it because anywhere I went, like throughout my childhood, that was like one of the most popular things that played, music wise. So I'm like, I had a good dose of it. I've had a good like amount for the rest of my life. I don't want to listen to it anymore.
It's like some people where it's like I used to always say like, oh, like I like everything but country. Yeah. And then like I heard old country and like really listened to it, and I was like, okay, there's some truth here. Country. Like, okay, I can't say that because I was ignorant. I didn't know, know, whereas I can say definitely, hey, I'm not a big fan of like, I don't know, trap music or something. I don't know, like something like that. Like, where I'm just like, I've heard a lot of it. I'm not a fan of it. Let's just move on, Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly, for sure. I understand that. So that's interesting. I wasn't sure. Like, I mean, you were mentioning as far as like things being different on the European charts compared to like the North American charts and the Canadian charts and stuff. That's more what I was curious about. Like, there's bands that are huge in Europe and kind of those areas, but then in North America, no one almost knows who they are. So it's definitely a very interesting thought. Was there any, just because you even mentioned like talking to your girlfriend about a song, is there any like one song that comes to mind that's like it was a huge hit over there, but then no one knows it here? I'm just curious. Putting you on the spot a little bit.
Like an English song, right? Like
yeah.
I gotta think about it. Oh man. No, yeah, I'm gonna have to think about this,
okay,
and
well,
then
we can come out if you think of it, just blurt it out because I'm just,
or like worst case, I'm gonna like send you a link tomorrow morning, and you're gonna just like whatever get it later. know what I'm talking about.
That's awesome. I just always like in doing these podcasts, and you know, my number one thing here is like I'm also getting to know you because I mean we've been exchanging texts and stuff for the last year and a half, but like I don't know you, so it's like as we're talking and little things come up and it's just like me kind of throwing stuff like, oh, this would be interesting. What about this? What about this? You know, but before we kind of got off on a little tirade there, we were talking about kind of you transitioning into heavier music and that kind of a thing. So going from, you know, Rise Against and Silverstein and Linkin Park and kind of that more, I guess in a way, kind of the more accessible, heavier stuff where it's like, you can still hear it on the radio regularly and things of that nature. Obviously, bands, especially like Rise Against, I mean, you can hear Rise Against on the radio all the time. From there, as you got a little older, was there any bands in particular that really like kind of the more like, I guess, almost getting into that metalcore world and that kind of metalcore, hardcore world? Was there any bands in particular that really kind of gave you that shot in the arm that was like, okay, this is really what I like?
Yeah, but like in a weird way. Like I remember Alexis on Fire. I remember getting which do you remember which album was that had Accidents on it and like
oh my, I'm looking it up because I can't remember the name, but I know the album you're talking about very well.
Yeah, with the girl screaming and it's like there's a green and it's like an old like horror comic.
I'm looking it up right now because it's bothering me.
Yeah,
I'm gonna feel really. I'm a you know 91 to 95 millennial, so I know Alexis on Fire quite well.
Yeah. Okay.
I am gonna just. I can't believe I'm forgetting right now. People are probably screaming at us like,
I know,
how the hell? Watch out.
I think I have the physical copy of that album on my shelf. Like, I could just walk right now and get it.
Yeah, but, man, it was, Watch Out was the name of that record.
Watch Out, yeah.
And that was, what a record.
Right now. Yeah, that was a great record. And, but that's the thing about it is I remember, having, like, I had this, like, phase for a while when I was, I think when I was, like, in grade 9 or something where I used to go to the library, to the public library a lot, and then just get like 10 different music CDs and go home, put it into my CD drive on my computer, and it would, iTunes would ask you like, would you like to import that music, you know, to your iTunes? And, you know, obviously I would, and that's how
I do
new music, you know, and so, but then like I remember probably putting on a random song from Watch Out by Alexis and like thinking, okay, like this part sounds cool, pressing next, and then the first thing I heard was like George's screaming and just thinking like what is he doing? Like is this a joke, or like is this like why does it sound like this? Like this is weird, like do people listen to this? And like this is at the point that I was already like listening to Silverstein like on the regular and listening to Rise Against, and you know Linkin Park was like old news at that point. So like realistically I should have probably not been so like weirded out by it, but like I was. But at the same time, like I remember putting it on my iPod and listening to it like on the walk home from school the next day, and like being like I still don't like the screaming, but I really like the instrumentation. I really like the singing, right? And then listening to it the next day and being like, I think the screaming is starting to grow on me a little bit. So like it was kind of like that, where it's like I almost didn't want to like it, but like I couldn't help it, And like the screaming is like, I think there's just so many different levels of screaming and so many different voices and tones, and like so much you can do with every voice and tone, that like for me, with that, like I guess like the closed-mindedness of only knowing like a few bands that had harsh vocals, that it just sounded weird what they were doing, but like it kind of drew me to them.
For sure. And I mean, especially with George, like his scream was very, I guess you would say like Alex on Fire was definitely more of like a kind of like a post-hardcore band, and very raw, and but the instrumentation was very accessible, and obviously Dallas Green's singing is, I mean, beautiful.
Yeah.
But then George was like, it sounded like he was like, his throat was like being pushed out of his body. It's like, how was he making this noise? What the hell?
Exactly. Like that was my thoughts. Like I was like, this doesn't sound safe. It sounds like it hurts. Yeah. I remembered something and I was gonna say it and then I didn't want to cut you off, but it's all good. I'm completely over it, completely forgot already, so we can just move on. It's all good, man. Sometimes my short-term memory just like is like non-existent.
Just disappears. I got you. I'm the same way, but it's funny. Like I'm sensing this pattern of like, going from even like kind of the more I guess punk-ish in a way, as far as I guess with like a Rise Against and a Silverstein, where like they're kind of like that punk rock, hardcore rock, like kind of I never know what to call them. Like to me, I just call them punk rock because this is what it is, Going from that to like bands with like some screaming, to then a band like Alexis on Fire that's a little more screaming. Like it's interesting how like your progression was very like kind of, almost like you just kind of kept getting into it and getting into it and getting into it. Mm-hmm. Aside from Alexis on Fire, was there anyone else that kind of really? Because, I mean, your voice is very, like, you go from, the great clean singing and screaming to kind of, and that great kind of mid-range scream that you have, to kind of almost a little deeper sometimes. Do you have anyone kind of in that more straight up kind of metalcore genre that kind of influenced you in that, or?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, like it's hard to like pick out specifics, because at that point, like I started really wanting to be in a band and really wanting to like do music and like really just like really immersing myself in that whole culture, and like almost like having like too many influences, and like there was like at some point, like when I started like playing in bands, there was that point when like, Asking Alexandria and We Came as Romans and like Attack and Miss May I, and those bands like came into the picture, right? But like I didn't necessarily ever look at them as influences. And like they are influential, they influenced me and like stuff I've made, like whether I acknowledge it or not, but I just like I'm never consciously thinking about those bands necessarily as like, like that's what inspired me to do this thing or this other thing. Like with We Came as Romans, for instance, I did have like a big like phase where I was listening to them a lot, and like my band at the time, like we were playing shows and we had a screamer, and like I'm fast forwarding here a little bit,
and we'll get into that for sure.
Yeah, and I definitely like whatchamacallit, I definitely remember getting to this place with like a few of my band members where like the music that we were making was more like what you'd call like screamo, and we were all talking about like we don't want to make screamo, we want to make like serious music, like we want it to sound serious. And the stuff that like We Came as Romans were making at the time, and there's this other band called Oceana, and their first album, The Tide. So not to be confused with Oceano, who are like super heavy. Oceana are like, because everyone who I talk to about this are always like, oh, you mean Oceano? And I'm like, no, it's Oceana. There's two different bands. So Oceana, they had like, I think it was their first full length called The Tide, and it was like super atmospheric, and it had some clean singing, but it didn't really have a lot of songs that had like choruses per se on them. It would just have like a moment of climax or a moment of like the song kind of chills out a bit, and the singer, the clean vocalist sings, but mostly it was like screamed by their vocalist Keith from start to finish. And on top of that, like on top of the like really like, I guess what I at the time I thought was like pretty heavy screaming, they had like, you know, like pretty like decently heavy breakdowns, but also like really like atmospheric melodic leads, right? So it was like the perfect combination of like, at that point, of like what we considered, like me and my friends or my bandmates, what we considered to be like serious music in comparison to like mid 2000s screamo sound.
Which was almost like, some would say, I mean, at this point, it's almost like become a meme in a way, which is unfortunate, because there was some great music at that time. And I mean, you mentioned a band, We Came as Romans, and I mean, you know, big shout outs, of course, to them. And, you know, them obviously losing Kyle was a horrible thing, you know. And they were a band that, you know, I was never as into that era of kind of the metalcore scene, but they were a band that really, for me personally, like they really were a game changer for me, because I was like, there's structure here. There's a little bit more going on here than just straight up like dun 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 dun. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Because a lot of the bands at the time, like I feel like a lot of people might not know this, but a lot of the bands at the time had that problem where not all they did. I don't want to diminish like, you know, their work, but like that's sort of how we looked at it amongst the Warped Tour going crowds, is like, oh, like this band sounds like they're just trying to mimic that Asking Alexandria album, or like, oh, like is he just using Zero the whole song? Because like, you know, I've heard that pattern used on Zero on Drop C before. And
exactly.
Like, you know, at that point when like me and a lot of my friends were already in bands and we started writing our own music and learning other bands' music and whatnot, we started dissecting it. And when the market became like oversaturated in that whole like post-hardcore metalcore umbrella subgenre, I feel like it just became so easy for the audience to like just point out the bullshit, right?
For sure. And I mean, you know, how many different patterns can you do on Zero? You know what I mean? And like, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of like, you know, I call it caveman music. You know, like the Hate Breeds and stuff like that, where it's very, you know, give me a
hardcore.
Yeah, like just give me a very simple riff. That's the stuff I really do like that stuff. But when every band I'm Warped to is trying to recreate Stand Up and Scream, it's like, okay, that's what kind of turned me off personally. Like, I was just kind of like, I've heard this before.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you and your bandmates at the time kind of were on the same wavelength of that. And as we're kind of shifting the conversation now into kind of getting into you actually starting to play music and things like that, which is awesome because that's what I wanted to get into next. I'm just going to take a quick second here to give a big shout out to some people that help make this show possible. And we'll be right back with Eitan from Her Majesty The King. Hey, you. Yeah, you. Listen to the Hodder Show right now. Are you in a band? Maybe you're a business owner of some kind, a performer, maybe a pro wrestler, an event promoter, an athlete, or maybe you're just an everyday person who needs some photo editing done. You need a great graphic design guy, and have I ever got the hookup for you? My man and close personal friend, Mr. Jason Reese from Jaybird Digital Arts. Whether you need logos, t-shirts, stickers, tickets, business cards, banners, menu, brochures, flyers, posters, Facebook banner videos, door hangers, photo editing and restoration, print ads, lyric video editing, signs, notepads, window clings, letterhead, bookmarks, programs, magnets, greeting cards, calendars, rack cards, invitations, envelopes, pens. Jason will work with you to develop a style that is unique to you and that tells everybody just how special your business, event, or you personally are, and you will stand out from the crowd. On top of the fact that he does offer free delivery between Cobourg, Ontario and Kingston, Ontario, message him today right now for a free quote. That's right, a free quote. Tell him about your idea. You got something outside the box, he will make it happen. With great rates and service, you cannot go wrong. I've used Jason literally for everything over the past 3.5 years, and I cannot say enough good things about the man himself and his work. So contact him today on the web at jaybirddigitalarts.com or on social media under Jaybird Digital Arts. That's Jaybird digitalarts.com. You can also email him at jaybird.digital.arts@gmail.com. And always keep in mind that his business is successful when your business looks good. And now let's get back to the show. All right, guys, we're back with Eitan from Her Majesty The King. We've been having a good time chatting about influences and kind of some of the first music that he ever heard and things like that. But now we're going to get into kind of the nitty-gritty of how did all of this craziness with you getting into playing music and singing and playing guitar and playing bass, I think, as well, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. How did all of that start for you?
Okay. How did it all start?
Buckle up, kids.
Well, okay, I'm gonna try and kind of like fast forward so I don't, I'm gonna try to not like make this a tangent, but I remember the first instrument I played was keyboards, and I wasn't too into it. Like I was probably like whatever, like 9, 8 years old. My parents were trying to make me do lessons. I did it for a bit. And then, like, whatever, I dropped it. And then probably around when I was 14-ish, I think it was for my 14th birthday, I wanted to get a guitar. And so I ended up getting a guitar for my birthday. That was, like, when I started playing guitar and, like, learning how to, like, write music and, like, how to, like actually like immersing myself in like music and like playing it and everything it entails. And yeah, and I guess that would be like the beginning of everything in a way.
That's awesome. It's funny, I hear that all the time on this show. Oh yeah, I started playing keyboard or piano or whatever, and you know, I wasn't really into it. I wanted to play something else. And as someone who grew up with my mother being a classic piano teacher, like I can totally relate, where it's just like, Mom, I want to play music. Oh, here's a piano. Pfft, I don't want to play piano. I want to be like Jimmy Page. Come on.
Right, exactly.
That's funny.
And like, yeah, and that was at a very young age too. So like, that was at the age when like you don't know anything except like playing outside with your friends or like whatever kids do at that age.
I don't even know. I don't know what kids do anymore. I know what I did. I went out and like played with mud. You know what I'm saying? Like, whereas nowadays kids are like building
all the time, like at that age.
So the last thing you want to do is sit inside and run your scales. You know, it's like you want to go outside and hang out and play stickball or whatever the hell kids did back in the 2000s.
In the early 2000s.
Yeah, it seems like a lifetime ago. I don't even know anymore. What the hell did kids do?
Fuck, where did time go?
Dude, my sister just turned 30, and I'm like, she's like just over a year older than me, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be 30 in like a year and a bit, and I'm like, shit.
Yeah, I had that thought recently. Like, in a few years, I'm turning 30. Oh no.
Ah, you still got a few years. You're good.
Yeah.
You're all right. You're still a youngin'.
Kind of. Not really.
Once you hit the big 2.5, man, I don't know. I was like, holy shit.
Right? Like, man. Now I'm like, I turned 27 this year, and I'm like, am I really that old? Like, am I really in my, late 20s or whatever? Like actually, like, where did time go?
It's a crazy thing, man, for sure, to even just stop and think about it. It's like, holy shit. You think back, even like for us, like, we saw the turn of the century, we were there for, internet coming in and high-speed internet and things like that. And,
Right.
stuff that nowadays seems so, like, I have people that I know that were not alive when, the century turned, and they're like, they're out driving around now, and I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah. I know.
It's a crazy thought.
Man, it's messed up.
Anyway, so as far as when did you start singing? When about was that, and kind of going from that thought? When did screaming come into the picture? And did you ever take any lessons for any kind of singing or anything? Or was it all just kind of, you were like, I'm just going to start doing this and see what happens?
Yeah, with singing, I did take lessons. I started taking, so I started wanting to learn how to sing, because I started playing music, like I said, around when I was 14, like playing guitar or whatever, and, trying to like start bands and all that kind of stuff, and then realizing that I'm gonna need some training if I'm gonna try and sing, because singing is not easy, and like I didn't want to just like just do it. I wanted to know what I'm doing, so I took some private lessons, and like around that same time I also started playing bass. I got my first bass, and also around that same time, I was I started my first band, or like my first band that was like actually doing things.
Yeah, not a Facebook band, like a real, like.
Yeah, exactly. We made music. You could go and listen to it.
Yeah.
We were called Right Before She Falls. We were terrible. We sounded like, like a terrible screamo band. And during when that band was starting out, like I don't remember exactly like the order of events right now, but within a very short period of time, within probably a half a year, I both started that band, and I started taking vocal lessons, and then I also started playing bass like on the side, and in the beginning of Right Before She Falls, when we did our first show, I remember I was I was the screamer, because our screamer that we originally had left after like the first band practice, and like I guess like I decided that I knew how to do it or whatever. I don't know how that came about, but like one thing led to the next, and then I wasn't just singing, I was screaming too. And I think when we started that band, I was supposed to play guitar and play keyboards on the side, but like very quickly I became just a vocalist. And then it it switched, like our lineup switched a little bit, and and we found somebody to be a screamer, and I started focusing more on like playing an instrument while singing, and then also doing like synths and like stuff like that. And also back then we didn't have backing tracks like the way we have them today. Not because like technology, but because we just didn't know any better. We just had all our synth tracks like pre-recorded, and then I would trigger them live with this like big Boss looper pedal. So I had to like stomp on the right pedal at the right time while like singing and playing bass, and it was a mess.
Crap.
It was a mess.
Definitely not a lot of room for error on that.
No,
for
not at
sure.
all. Yeah.
Next thing you know, the wrong loop's going. You're like,
Yeah, backing tracks saved my life. I'm glad I never have to use that looper pedal again.
I mean, it shows some skill, I think, for sure, where it's like, you have to trigger stuff yourself. But yeah, backing tracks are a very underrated tool that can be used nowadays. Don't get me wrong, some people I think can abuse them a little bit sometimes. But, if you have keyboards and synths and stuff like that you can't necessarily play while you're playing bass and singing or whatever, there's nothing wrong with it at all. If anything, it takes another side of things. I was just having this conversation. I don't know if you're familiar with words like wildfire at all, but AJ that was just on the show last week, and we were literally having this conversation where he's like, it's funny that if you're playing to a backing track, you have to be perfectly on time at all times, or else you're screwed.
Well, of course, yeah. As soon as if the drummer goes off time and you got synths playing on that, on the time that it's supposed to be, then you're gonna be hearing that something's off. Like most people are gonna notice. And we've even had I think we've had that happen more than once. I know we've had that happen more than once live, where we had our backing tracks set up wrong for one reason or another, and it basically led to the metronome, the click coming through. And actually, funny story, the very first Her Majesty the King show was in Cambridge, Ontario in 2011. And we when we played that show, I remember for some reason, I guess it was set up wrong, or maybe it was exported wrong, but our clicks were coming through, and the audience could hear that every time a song started, obviously that would come on, and the whole time I remember thinking no way, that's gonna be our first show as a band. And then we finished playing, and everyone were like, oh my god, you guys were so good, that thing you do, click click click, that's so different. And the promoter came to us, and he's man, how that was so cool, you guys have such a unique sound, how do you get that sound going where it's click click click? And just thinking okay, do people but that's the thing about playing on stage that I guess I realized then was that if you're not acting something's wrong, visibly acting something's wrong, then the audience isn't gonna know that something. If you're acting that's how it's supposed to be, that's what they're gonna think that it's supposed to be like.
That's it, man. If it just kayfabe it. If you know, oh shit, something's going wrong, but you don't sell it,
just don't panic.
No one will know what's wrong. I have the privilege. What the hell did I just say? The privilege of knowing lots of fantastic musicians and people I've interviewed over the years, who I'll see them play and they'll come off the stage and say, oh man, I had the worst performance because here's what happened here and here's what happened here, and I'm like, that was one of the best shows I've ever seen. So I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but and I mean, obviously, as someone who is a guitar player and was a guitar tech and stuff like that, I'll notice if something messed up with the guitar, or he missed a chord or something. Shit happens. It's live music, so long as you don't completely fuck up to the point where you have to stop the song.
Right.
Who cares? It's all in good fun, And the fact that you had people coming up to you saying, oh, you guys have such a unique sound with the click, that just tickled me, because I'm just picturing you just oh, thanks.
Yeah, that was totally on purpose, we meant to do that.
I would have ran with it, man. I would have released a demo with just
the click track demo.
Oh, that's great. That's actually
I'm gonna write that down in case I I need some more music ideas.
Yeah, man. Just release a song with a click track. A tale of well clicked characters. Nah, it's stupid.
Exactly.
That's stupid. I don't know why that tickles me so much. I'm just I'm just picturing I guess because I'm just picturing you obviously you don't want to be really. especially a
Yeah.
promoter. Like you'd think like he's probably seen thousands of shows and he doesn't know what's
Right,
up with
yeah.
that. It's like whatever. Again, as long as they had fun and they were entertaining, they liked you, who cares, right?
Yeah, and no, yeah, the funny thing was the promoter was actually like somebody in the scene. He also like plays instruments, was also in a band. And like he was like a nice guy, a smart guy, a guy who knows what he's doing. His band played Warped Tour. Like he really like he's not the kind of guy that you think wouldn't notice it. You know what I mean? But like he was legit like, oh, like that was supposed to be like that. And mostly just because none of us like really like made a commotion about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And like I've been in that position once before where like there's actually a fight that breaks up on stage during your performance between the bandmates. I mean, like an argument. And like I've seen that happen like to multiple bands multiple times, right? But it's like, yeah, like that's when a crowd notices that something's wrong. When like a member is yelling at another member like, yo, like, like whatever, like you can clearly hear an argument.
Fucking amp.
Yeah, like I don't want to like I kind of don't want to reference the specific story.
Sure,
like,
of course, yeah.
Yeah, because like the person like involved in that, like they're also still active, and like at the end of the day, like like shit happens, and like we all like learn from it, move on, grow, and like become better, and yeah, and I wish him all the best. But like that day, I just remember like, or like in that moment, I just remember like looking at him and then looking at the crowd and looking at him and looking at the crowd and be like, what is going on right now? Yeah,
you have two options. Either you keep just in your own bubble and just keep playing away and whatever happens. But then if people are literally screaming at each other, I mean, you can't ignore it because then you're like, why is this guy ignoring his bandmates screaming at each other?
Right. And like when you're on stage, like not everybody does that and whatnot, but like I feel like it's sort of a normal state to like kind of develop a persona or a character that like you kind of step into those shoes when you step on stage, and like separate that from like how you usually are. And like it definitely breaks the character immediately when somebody's like like part of your team is like, yo, like da 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 da, and people in the crowd are like, is that supposed to happen? Like, is that part of the act? And like, it's clearly not. Like, yeah, it's just it was a shitty experience, and I don't wish it on anyone. But like, that's honestly like that's the only time that like I spoke to like an audience member after, and they were like, yeah, like what's up with that? Like I clearly noticed obviously that like what was going on stage. And but like the stuff with the click tracks, I think, like I said, like it happened to us multiple times where like the clicks came through the monitors, and like I think only on one occasion it was pointed out by a person who actually used click tracks in their band, and like obviously if they didn't notice it, like I don't know who would.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it is what it is. Like there's stuff like that's going to happen. That's the beauty of that's the beauty and the curse of live music, right? There's stuff that's going to happen, and once you're in it, there's just you're along for the ride at that point, basically.
Oh yeah,
for sure. Well, speaking with talking about Her Majesty the King's first show, I'm curious. Obviously, you mentioned like there was a couple bands that you were in early on and kind of before you really got heavy with Her Majesty the King, but when exactly did Her Majesty the King start? And was that a band that you formed, or did you join Her Majesty the King?
Oh, yeah, I formed Her Majesty the King, and it kind of like it started originally when I was planning on leaving my old band right before she falls, and I sort of started looking into, hey, who could I start a new band with? And like, if I do this, I want to have the right group of people. Because at the time, like, we had a lot of like, it was like kind of a toxic environment in my old band, and like, like I was a kid, I was being a dick too. So like, and and at the end, like, yeah, I just kind of found this, like, group of people I was happy with, and we started what was like the foundations of Her Majesty the King in early 2011.
Right on. And I mean, you guys had definitely some early stuff you were working on as well. Was the plan with Her Majesty the King right from the get-go, like, okay, we're going to have... Because you guys kind of, in a good way, kind of bounce back and forth as far as, like, I'm not someone who gets super hung up on genres, but I know a lot of people are.
Mm-hmm.
I find that you guys kind of go back and forth as far as, sometimes you're a, kind of straight up metalcore. Sometimes maybe you have a little bit more of like just a straight up rock tendency, and you go back to 2011 with the Hereditary, like that. To me, you guys going from that record to your latest record, which we're definitely, of course, going to talk about, and that I did cover on the show a little while ago, A Tale of Well-Connected Characters. There's growth there, obviously, because it's 8 years apart. Mm-hmm. How was the process for you as far as, obviously, I'm assuming there was, there's been lineup changes and things of that nature, of course. That's the nature with any band. How was things with you going from when you started out kind of having okay, this is kind of what we are, to me, it seems like, hey, we're kind of just straight up more metalcore-y type stuff. Whereas with The Tale of Well-Connected Characters, it's like, don't get me wrong, it's still definitely that, but it's almost like there's a little more, I guess what I'm trying to say is a little more experimentation. So run me through how things were in the beginning with the recording of The Hereditary compared to A Tale of Well-Connected Characters and the writing process.
Okay, so I guess it all, in a way, like the recording process started, like it started from us, I guess. Yeah, like we'll start from the writing, if that's cool with you. I guess sure. It'll be easier to like explain all the context. Sure. But like in terms of like how we came about, like how the Heredity EP came about, was like, yeah, when Her Majesty was starting out, it was like the original lineup before we even had a name. It was myself, Andrew McGregor on guitar, and Nicola Sudano on drums. And we also had like one of the early people that we worked with was Nick from Lungless. And basically, originally we had these 3 songs that we were working on. It's Showtime, Be Quiet, and Walk South. And eventually, after practicing them for a while and kind of like reworking them a bit, we ended up sort of like not necessarily like getting shafted, but like in a way, I want to say like we had like some other members that came in, and like eventually they didn't necessarily want to work with myself and Andrew, and we decided, hey, like we're just gonna like continue what we're working on with some other people. And we came we came across Cam and Adam, who were also 2 members like in the like first official lineup. Adam used to do harsh vocals, and Cam was the guitarist, and he also was like a producer type like member. And basically, yeah, we came across those guys. We brought those 3 songs to them, and they already had a couple songs written as well. And yeah, we kind of like we sort of merged both of what we were doing into like one thing. And like that was when we officially like came out with the band Her Majesty. And then Nicola ended up coming on the first tour with us. He didn't do all the dates, but he like he still did some of them. And then he was there for the second tour, I'm pretty sure, or the third tour, and then he like rejoined officially at some point. So we kind of, yeah, like that lineup that we started with did end up also being like partially the main lineup for the Heredity EP, but we also had Cam there and Adam and also Avery from Words Like Wildfire, who you mentioned earlier. He used to play bass for us at that point, and yeah, and like we had a few other members that came and went for like shorter periods of time.
Yeah, sometimes it's almost like it can be a very and not in a negative way. It's just sometimes it can almost be like a quick cup of coffee. Hey, let's jam for a while. This is kind of cool. Is this a good fit? Maybe not. Let's part ways. Let's move on. Go work on other stuff. It's interesting. How it can be such a. Some people can get really hung up on it. Where it's like, oh, well, this person used to play in this band, and but they left that band, so I don't want to listen to that band.
Yeah.
Or like, people can get really hung up on it, and me, I'm just like, who cares? It's all fun, as long as it's good music. That's all that matters, right?
It's not that, like, I think, some people are very, like, I guess, anal about it, and they're like, or like maybe they hold grudges or whatever, or they're very sensitive. So they don't want to like, interact or like even like think about like previous people they've worked with. But, for me, it's always just been like, hey, like, that's part of like how I got here. That's part of how we got here. Like, yeah. So, and at the end of the day, like, like even if things ended up like kind of like in a negative way or whatever with a certain person, you got to look at like the positive times, like the good memories and whatnot. And I think with 90% or 99% of the people I've worked with, I'm on good terms, even if there was some beef or whatever.
For sure. And also, that was freaking 10 years ago.
Exactly.
For some people, pretty much,
you can't hold grudges like that. And like, even like in our circle, we kind of have this like inside joke of like, like, oh, like you've been in Her Majesty the King. Who hasn't been in Her Majesty the King?
That's funny. Like I said, you mentioned just because you mentioned them earlier, like even like with Avery, I was kind of like, oh, really interesting. Like, Nick, like, oh, interesting. Like that's just interesting little tidbits of information thrown in there, and that always makes me chuckle because it's like you just never know when who hasn't been in Her Majesty the King. That's funny.
Right. That's HMTK trivia for you.
If you play guitar or bass, metalcore style music at all in kind of that region of Ontario, you've probably been in Her Majesty the King. Let's be serious.
Probably, yeah.
I'm glad you have a sense of humor about that because that's just that's funny.
You got him, man.
For sure. Yeah. But so, like you mentioned, like some touring and stuff like that. Before we kind of get into more kind of what you're doing now and lately, what was kind of some of the touring you guys did? Like, was it just mostly like kind of across Ontario, or?
Yeah. As Her Majesty, like we mostly just toured Ontario, and we've also played in Quebec a couple times, like in Montreal and in Sherbrooke. We played once over there as well. But yeah, mostly I would say mostly just Ontario.
Right on. Well, it's even going from playing one end of Ontario to the other or whatever. That's not a laughable drive. Like that's if you're driving for more than a couple hours, to me, I'm like, hey, I consider that a little. If you're going on a tour of any kind at all, I'd say that's a tour.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like I'm very grateful to live where I live, and like in Ontario, and having like the luxury of having so many towns so close together, right? Because if you've ever talked to bands from the States when they come to tour Canada, like they're usually not even used to having such short drives comparing to what they usually have to do in the States, right? Or if they have 3 shows in Ontario, like it's gonna be like pretty close together in comparison.
Oh, for sure, especially where because you're near Vaughan, correct?
In what?
You're near Vaughan, correct?
What? Oh yeah, near Vaughan. I thought you were saying. Never mind. I thought you'd say something about Nirvana.
You're Nirvana, right? Never
I
mind.
was like, I'm not in Nirvana. I'm definitely not.
I am not in the band Nirvana. No, that's
Right.
well, it's just funny you were mentioning like being from around that area. Like that's a really good spot too. Like because there's in that area, I find there's been a lot of great bands that have come out of there, but also, you know, going to Toronto isn't a big deal. You know, going to north from there isn't a big deal. Heading out, you know, more east isn't a big deal. Like it's kind of a very good location to be a band that wants to kind of get stuff done.
Yeah, it's like very much in the center, and it's like everything's accessible. And yeah, when I was in high school, I used to live in Richmond Hill, and the Viva Blue goes down all the way from like, you know, Newmarket Terminal to Finch Station. So basically, anytime there was any concert, me and my friends would get together, hop on the Viva Blue, and then just go downtown. So it wasn't even like, you know, it wasn't even a struggle to like get around.
Well, that's awesome. It's always interesting, you know, like I mentioned to you earlier, like, you know, I grew up for 20 plus years in a small town, you know, in the middle of, you know, bumfuck nowhere. So it's like, for me, the thought of, you know, anytime I would go to even Oshawa or Toronto, it was like kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
So like, it's always funny. Like, oh, we just jumped on the train and went there. I'm like, shit,
Yep.
That must have been cool. That must have been cool. But getting back into Her Majesty the King, obviously, you know, talk about the early years and the first record and that, compared to kind of the most recent stuff that you've been doing with Her Majesty the King. Obviously, A Tale of Well-Connected Characters. You were working on that record for a couple of years, if I'm not mistaken, right? I think, or
Oh yeah,
what
for
was the story
like
with that?
for a few years. So originally we started working on it in 2016. I think some of the stuff I even started writing back in 2015. And yeah, and then basically that was like a period of time when the band was like started going through like more changes, more lineup changes, and also at the same time coming back from like a bit of a hiatus. Because I think, yeah, like around like 2014-ish, early 2015. Well, no, we did a few shows early 2015, but then for most of 2015 we didn't do much. But then yeah, like it was kind of like we had okay, so I had a certain idea in mind for what I was imagining the Her Majesty the King album being around like 2015, 2016. At that time, I was really into like some melodic hardcore and some like heavier stuff, but also some like, I don't know, more like polished, well-structured stuff. And yeah, like I guess some of the bands I was listening to were like Being as an Ocean and Defeater and Stick to Your Guns and some The Ghost Inside and For the Fallen Dreams. Yeah, and so like there was a lot of that like melodic hardcore ish sounding stuff going on. And yeah, so I kind of envisioned like, you know, an album that would have that to it, right? Maybe have some spoken word and whatnot. And yeah, and like at that time the lineup again, like I said, was switching, and eventually I started recording that album with a couple people. I think Paul was one of them and Neil was one of them. And yeah, and then we had more member changes as we were recording, and certain stuff was getting delayed. More member changes, then we're focusing on touring instead of releasing, and you know, and then there's certain things that were like, I would say like internal band things that if I would go into detail, it would be like, you know, it would maybe be a bit too much information, and
Sure,
like,
of course, yeah.
kind of ruin the mystique of like what happens behind the scene. And also like I don't necessarily want to paint anyone in any certain light. Like I just feel like at the end of the day, like if this is your group, if this is your team and you're not delivering, then it's on all of you, you know? So like regardless on who, you know, was maybe holding the project back, like at the end of the day, like, you know, we had him in the project, like who was forcing us to do that? Nobody.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
If like this was all in our hands this whole time, and that's kind of how I look at it.
For sure. And I mean, sometimes just you'll fight to like, oh, I want to work with this person. And then just after a while, it's like, okay, we just don't have that chemistry, that it just doesn't work. It can happen,
Yeah, sometimes they just also like have a different, like even if they have similar priorities to you, like the way they approach it is different, right? Like,
and they can have a different vision.
Exactly.
Like I get the vibe if I'm talking to you, and like you even said earlier, like kind of, Her Majesty the King is kind of, I think it's safe to say, is kind of very much your baby in a way. And, with this record, it's like, I get the feeling like you had a very specific vision for what you wanted with this, and like, okay, this is what I think it should be. And, if someone doesn't have the same thoughts, there's nothing wrong with just saying, okay, let's just move on.
Right. Yeah. And like, I would like, I would definitely like paint it in a slightly different coat of paint, because it's not necessarily like, oh, like if you don't agree with my vision.
Oh, sure.
Like,
yeah.
Because like, and that's the other thing. Like, I think we just, we haven't covered this yet, but like with Her Majesty the King, and even with, well, let's just say specific to Her Majesty the King. With this band, I've always been from the beginning, like the primary songwriter, and not because like of like a control thing, like
sure.
like oh yeah, like I write the songs and this.
Yeah, I write the songs, bro.
Right. Like, and it's been always more of a okay, well, like anyone written anything, whatever, like, oh, that's what you wrote, cool, like you wrote, you can only write a part, sure, oh, like you only know how to write like breakdowns or whatever, sure, like I'll use what I got with the people I'm working with and like take what they can bring to the table, and then like do the rest or fill in the blanks. Or sometimes the opposite, like I'll come up with an idea and be like, here's a song, like literally, like we can do anything you want with it. Like maybe I'll, obviously if there's a part I love, I'll be like, yeah, like don't take that out. But like, we can do anything we want with it, whatever, go nuts, right? But like I find that like that's like in a perfect world, like you'll present a song to people and then everyone will contribute.
Yeah, for sure.
The reality. Yeah, sorry to cut you off.
Okay,
but like the reality is that like different people have different skill sets, and then like I said before, different priorities. They have a different approach to that. So, like they can't even if they want to contribute the way that like like another person does, they might just not be able to, like in multiple ways.
For sure. Some people have their strengths, it's like you could have someone who's the best damn riff writer in the business, but they can't structure a song worth shit, or they can't, and that's not a bad thing. Hey, this person writes fantastic riffs, but they don't know what to do with them. Right. Or, this person writes great lyrics, but can't write melodies to save their life. Like, it's just, I think, the whole thing is what you're saying too, is like, I always analogize things to food, I guess because I'm a fat guy. It's like, okay, here's this steak. This is steak. And then someone goes, hey man, what if I put a little pepper on that? And you're like, okay, I'm for it. And then like, oh, if I put a little bit of garlic butter on that, you're like, okay, I'm for it. Okay. Or like, just, stuff like that. It's like, hey, what it's like,
exactly. That's me.
Let's make it better. Let's, it's like, oh, I got this great, this great verse. Oh, I got this chorus. Check this out. And it's like, oh shit. Okay. We got a song now.
Exactly. Yeah. And like a lot of the stuff that, like that is Her Majesty the King music, I would say like most of it is a collaborative effort.
Sure.
It's like even stuff that is like, like mostly me is still not like oh, I sat down and I was like, with an iron fist,
I shut
like
down
it's
and
gonna be my
crafted
way or the
these
highway.
songs.
Yeah, and like and also like yeah, I guess that's really important to make that distinction because well, first of all, I had a phase where I was like I said in my old band like when I was like 16, 17 right before She Falls. I think I brought that up before. I was kind of a dick. Like I wasn't aware of it, but like like whatever. Like you're a teenager. Then you look back at it. You're like, oh yeah, like I was being an asshole. So how can I not be that? And you learn to not be that. And like yeah, and so like and with that band, I felt like one of the reasons why or how I was being an asshole was because I was being too controlling or like I like there was a lot of stuff that I would write and then bring a whole song to the band and then somebody would be like, oh, like what if I make this change? And I would be like, nah, like I hear it like this. And like I was a dick about it. And so like that's why when Her Majesty the King started out, like it was really important for me that like I'm not gonna like repeat the same mistakes and not gonna do that. And then also like just from seeing other people's experiences I kind of learned recently that it's not necessarily always a bad thing to be that guy that's like, hey, like that's the way it is and like period, because sometimes things don't get done otherwise. So I mean
Sure.
different things work in different circumstances. I just found that like like being that guy doesn't work for me because I want to work with people and people don't want to work with assholes. So if you're going to be an asshole to people, like, because you're like, super picky about that bend being a quarter bend and not a 3/4 bend or whatever,
Yeah.
then like, then it's just like, yeah, like then make a solo project, like a full-on solo project and do that there.
Just do everything
where, like,
yourself.
yeah, do everything yourself. Yeah, like I have that too, like a side thing where it's just music that I'm just making by myself. But that's like, that's a thing, like that's one thing. And then like being in a band working with people, that's a different story. Like, like they're not like you're like, they're not like they're not working for you. They're working with you.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
it's a team.
They're not just like a bunch of hired guns that you're bringing into. Okay, so
Right.
then this is how this is played. Now play it
Yeah.
that way.
And
Okay,
like I said,
cool.
like there's a place for that too. Like like, and you can do that like totally without being an asshole. Like if you're like a solo musician and you need a backing band, I have friends that play in like solo musicians backing bands. Nicola actually being one of them in Matthew Runaway's band. And yeah, and like from what I know, like Matthew is a great guy. He's like super nice, he's super chill, and like he fully takes like Nicola's opinions and everything, into consideration and whatnot, and treats him with respect. And it's like, yeah, like even in that case, like you don't gotta be a dick about it. But like in my case, it's also just like it was always really important for me in Her Majesty that like I get to experience working with people, not just saying that I worked with people. So like I'm always like pushing the members and like honestly sometimes too hard to like get stuff done, get stuff released, get stuff recorded, and like yeah, and like I said, some people it's just like it's not necessarily like if you have like a family to worry about or you have like you're currently going through like some huge financial whatever, it's not necessarily the place to have a guy like call you up every day like, yo, so what's the update, or like, yo, so here's the update, and like I kind of learned that along the way too.
For sure. It's like anything creative. And I mean, I've said this to people who ask me about starting podcasts with co-hosts and stuff. I'm like, listen, someone has to be the point person.
Yeah.
You have to have someone who is the quote unquote leader. There just has to be, or else nothing's gonna get done. And you have to be, if you have to be the point man, so to speak, and be like, okay, hey guys, so here's what's going on with this, and hey, I need like, okay, hey Ted, here's some riffs that we have. Maybe you can work on them and try and work something out. And
yeah, Ted.
2-3 weeks later, hey Ted, where the fuck's the riffs, homie? What's going on? It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
Ted.
sorry, man. Sorry, man. I ended up playing COD all day.
Right, exactly.
Well, what the fuck, Ted? Where's the damn riffs? Like, it's
Right.
just...
Yeah, and then it's fucked because like you feel bad too, like being in that like you feel bad like having to like press or push on that person, but at the same time you're like, you know, like once you're done feeling bad, you start being angry because you're like, well, I'm sitting here on my ass all day, like da 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 da, like, and like yeah, and you know, and it makes you feel stuck a little bit, and like that's like. I guess that's the other, like the flip side, the other side of the coin of working with, you know, like a group of people, or, you know, just like generally with working with people, is that like you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if the people you're working with are not producing work, then yeah, then it makes you stuck in the same spot.
For sure. And I mean, like I said, you know, it's like that with anything creative when you're dealing with other people. It's like that even just working with people. If someone doesn't do their part, the whole thing is on a standstill. So it's like, I can absolutely, and I'm sure everyone can understand that. Like, you know, sometimes you have to just, hey man, what's going on, Ted? Come on. Like, let's, hey,
Ted.
You know, yeah, I don't know who Ted is, but he's not doing his part, man.
No.
Ted's going to be the name of my co-host too, you know, just for the sake of the joke. But that's funny, man. But as far as kind of as we slowly get ready to kind of wrap it up here, with Her Majesty the King right now, obviously a tale of well-connected characters. What is just kind of the quick synopsis, and anyone who wants to hear my full thoughts on that record, as well as hearing the record in its entirety, if for some bizarre reason you haven't yet. I feel like if you're listening to this, you're probably very familiar with it, but if for some reason you haven't heard it, you can go check out episode 237 of the Hodder Show, as we do a full showcase of that fantastic record with lots of tasty riffs and awesome vocal hooks and lots of good stuff that you guys are going to thoroughly enjoy. Even if you've heard it, go check it out anyway, because it's a great record. You can also find it everywhere you find your music. What is, just kind of in a nutshell, a tale of well-connected characters?
It's in a way, it could be whatever you want it to be. Like I think songs are good. Lyrics are best when you could leave them open to interpretation.
Sure.
And like, yeah, and a tale of all connected characters was at one point of time, it meant like one thing to the people that were working on it. And then, you know, because originally, like fun little bit of trivia, originally we got this album artwork as like literally the first thing that we pitched on together as a band. So we bought the album artwork back in 2011, and it was sitting on the shelf until 2019, end of 2019 when it was released. And so back then, you know, just the title, A Tale of All Connected Characters, and like, you know, there's a bit of a story about the girl on the album artwork. I'm not sure if you want to get into that right now as well, but at the time, like that phrase, I remember that was I think it was Avery's friend or something that said like that like said to him, oh wow, it's like well connected characters or something like that. And so then when we were hanging out one night, you know, that was brought up, and eventually that kind of was molded into a tale of all connected characters. But like it sort of started from the concept of, you know, we're all connected. And not like in a like arbitrary, like spiritual way. Well, like in that way too, I'm sure. But we're all connected in the sense that, like, you know, like for instance, like, you know, you're providing a platform right now for me to speak about this project, and like that might, like, you know, like make somebody in a band that I work with, you know, message you and be like, yo, like, you know, would you be interested in interviewing me? And like, you might end up talking to them and find out that actually, like, that guy is Garrett's third cousin. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like, and also like, once you kind of like the world really feels like, like everyone is distant, and like, like sometimes you go through shit where like you feel like you're the only one going through this shit. But then like once you really start kind of breaking it down more, opening the conversation with like literally anyone, like about literally anything, like you start finding out like, hey, like we're literally like, we're kind of all going through the same shit, like in different ways, and like we're kind of like all in this together and all get affected by all these things, like just as much in different ways, but just as much, right?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, like you were just saying, especially for me, I think kind of more at the end there when you were talking about how like we're all connected and so many people are going through so much similar things. Obviously everyone's story is unique, but it's like basically you're not alone because you're connected somehow, and that's really cool, man, because that's kind of the vibe I got from it. Then also I knew that there's kind of a story, so if you're someone who's really into storytelling songwriting in a way that's vague and not like just so on the nose, exactly what he's talking about, go check it out, the record, if you haven't heard it, because it's a really fun listen. And, I'm someone who is such a fan of people who, as much as I love to sometimes dissect lyrics and things like that, I also love when an artist says to me, like, it's whatever you want it to be. It's very vague. There's a quote from Aaron Lewis from Stained when he was asked one time about lyrics. And he said, listen, he said, it is whatever you need it to be. When he says, I keep things perfectly vague because my story and what this song means to me could ruin the song for you.
Right. Yeah, that's so true.
And I thought about that, and I went, wow, like, because, I mean, I think even, like, Sean Morgan from Seether said that once, too, where he's like, what if, I don't like to talk about song meanings, because what if my meaning sucks? What if I'm like, oh, yeah, the song's about taking a shit? And it's like, oh, I thought it was about, like, releasing, I don't even, obviously this isn't a part of the quote, I'm butchering this fucking quote right now, but it's like, oh, I thought it was about, like, releasing bad things inside you, and he's like, well, yeah, taking a shit, it's like just, it's like, so sometimes the world needs that, where it's just very vague, and it's just a good listen and a good story, and like, you're just being taken on a ride on a tale of well-connected characters.
Exactly.
Damn right, that's it, man.
Yeah, man, I feel that. And like, yeah, I guess that's like that general idea, like the whole a tale of well-connected characters, like essentially we're all those connected characters, like we are, all well-connected characters in a way. And and definitely, like it definitely touches on some themes of, you're not alone. Like I'm glad you like picked that out of it. But every song, even if it does have a theme or like a story behind it, it's still trying to convey this like overall story that is more vague and more open for interpretation. Because like you said, like if you already, like for instance, if you already have something that song made you think of or feel, my explanation would just take away from it,
Exactly. And obviously there are some times where an explanation for a song can make it even more extreme and may make it even mean more to some people depending on the song. But Definitely. Then also, like you said, what if it doesn't? What if it changes it for the, for the not for the better for you? So that's really cool, man. I love this. I could sit and talk to people about songwriting processes and stuff for hours because it always fascinates me, and it's always so interesting to hear, songwriters' kind of point of view on lyrics and things like that. It always is really, really interesting to me. But as far as kind of before we get ready to go here, and I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time, man, especially as late of a night as it is. I'm not even going to say what time it is because it's, excuse me, pretty late. So I appreciate you toughing it out for me here. But just before we go, I'm curious real quick, on top of obviously being a fantastic musician, I mentioned earlier that you kind of wear a couple other hats as well. You are a booking agent with the Foundation Agency. What's the deal with that real quick?
So the Foundation Agency is a booking agency. It's also a management company or a record label or whatever you need it to be. We're essentially a company that you can come to help you build the foundation to your music career. Whatever it is that you need, we can provide. Probably as far as services, it ranges anywhere from management and booking, but also to video and production and counseling and anything like that, ghostwriting, and basically it's just a platform where I can help out bands, make a future for themselves in this scene with the tools that I have.
Awesome. Well, it's cool because another, just for the sake of the pun, another tale of well-connected characters is the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, the homies in Don Valley are associated with you guys, correct?
Yes, they are. Yeah,
the homies in Don Valley. It's just one of my favorites. Love those guys.
Yeah.
On top of that, also you do a little bit of graphic design work. If you want to talk about that real quick before we go.
Sure. Yeah, I recently launched my portfolio as a website. You can find it at eitansdesigns.com. And I've been putting in a lot of work into that. I design cover art for music, for albums and singles, and I design logos, flyers, posters. I also do some video work. I can design merchandise and other stuff. So yeah, if somebody who's listening is interested in my services or checking them out, go check it out, and give me a shout. We'll work on something together.
For sure. Now, last question, kind of a staple here on the show to end off every single episode I do with a musician here. Real quick, tell me either your favorite show that you've ever played, or on the flip side, the worst show you've ever played that's kind of a funny story.
Wait, favorite show I've ever played? What do you mean?
Favorite show you've ever played as far as playing a show, like a concert or...
Oh, okay. My bad. It's getting late. I'm thinking
That's
TV
okay,
show.
sorry.
I'm I've never performed.
You want to talk about a TV show? What? No,
Yeah,
just
your
favorite concert you've ever performed at,
yeah.
or the worst. Because some people, I've heard every type of story as far as just a funny story from the worst show ever, or a really moment that was just really cool for you that you had on stage.
Okay. Damn. I don't know if there's a favorite show, and I guess I'd rather not talk about worse, because especially
Sure.
at the end, you want to finish on a high note. But recently we played recently. I mean, it's been a while ago, but recently we played at Steve Fest and in Toronto, and that was pretty sweet. I'm forgetting exactly when that was. That was at the end of summer. It was my buddy Steve's birthday, and he does this thing at the end of the year every year, called Steve Fest, where he celebrates his birthday with a music festival. And and this year was pretty dope. We had a good turnout, and it was just a good time all around. When you got the right collection of people in the room, and it's just a good vibes all around. Yeah, that. It was just a good night.
Oh, for sure, man. That's awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, man. I appreciate you toughing it out and staying up so late so that we could finally get this episode done. It's been so much fun getting to talk to you, man. Definitely. And you'll find all the links to all of Eitan's projects down below in the description of this podcast. And before we go, the only thing I have left to say is, Ted, get those fucking riffs done.
Fucking Ted.
All right, brother. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later.
Man. Have a good one.
All right, folks, there you have it. My chat with Eitan Melody of Her Majesty The King. Hope that you guys enjoyed it. And thank you so very much for the continued support of this podcast. We try and have fun here, especially with all the craziness going on in the world right now. You know, I personally had a little bit of of an interesting last couple of weeks here. I'm not getting into it right now because I'm going to be getting into it this Sunday on the 250th episode live cast. Be sure to check it out on YouTube, 9 p.m. Go on the Hodder Show YouTube channel. Just type in the Hodder Show and it'll be right there. Be sure to subscribe so you get notified when I do go live. We have a lot of fun things to talk about. Hoping to get some fun Q&A happening. And I will tell you guys the story of my interesting kind of brush, I guess, if you will, with the Rona and what happened there. It's going to be a fun time. I also have one very cool little surprise. My triumphant return to the live cast world. I am so very excited about it, and I hope you guys are too. It's going to be a lot of fun, but if you can't come out live, be sure to keep your eye out because, of course, the video will be up as well as the audio version will be up shortly after we are done. No telling how long we'll go for. It could be an hour, could be 2 hours. I have no idea. We will just see what happens, but I am so very excited for that, just like I was for this chat here today. Hope that you guys enjoyed it. Again, be sure to check out Her Majesty the King on the social media, as well as all the links down below for all of Eitan's projects. He's a great guy who is a very creative type and has a lot of things going on. He wears a lot of hats, kind of like your boy here. Kind of like almost maybe kindred spirits in that way a little bit. But either way, I thank him for allowing me to interview him here on the show and all the support. And I thank you again so much for the support. And of course, I got to give a quick shout out to my Patreon subscribers, my hotheads. Of course, Will from Rolls Royce, one of the premier punk rock bands in Canada. Hell, scratch that, in the world. Be sure to check them out, Rolls Royce. And Will, thank you so very much for all the support, my man. I appreciate the hell out of you. Will was actually on the show very recently with his band member Mitch, so be sure to go check that out. We talk about their latest EP, as well as we have a whole conversation all about COVID. If you're into that kind of thing, I appreciate the hell out of your support, Will. And of course, my boy Scott, who is the best damn window cleaner in the freaking business. If you are in the area and are in need of your windows being cleaned, your gutters cleaned, or something power wash, hit up my boy Scott at Suds Window Cleaning. That is Suds Window Cleaning here in Clarington, Ontario. He will take care of it for you, especially now that things are kind of starting to get lifted. Hopefully things are starting to look like we're getting back to normal a little bit in the next month or so. Be sure to hit him up. And Scott, I thank you so very much for all your support, my man, as well as just being one of my longest friends. I appreciate you, just like I appreciate you listening right now. Thank you again so very much for tuning in. Audio fist bump. And with that, I'm all out of time here, so I will catch you next time this Sunday, folks. Don't forget, again, this Sunday, live on YouTube, the Hodder Show will be live for my 250th episode. But if I don't talk to you then, I'll talk to you on the next episode of the show. Take it easy, guys.